We know the classic statement, "For God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." The point of that statement is that the message of Jesus and the provision of Jesus is for everybody, everyone who will accept it and receive it. We've read in Mark's Gospel the feeding of the 5,000, God making provision for them on that day. But he makes provision for all people everywhere, every day. Again, we've read of the feeding of the 4,000, because God has compassion on people everywhere to meet their daily needs. But the people who benefited from that were those who came to Jesus. Now, in Mark 8, we see that not everybody came to Jesus to respect him and honour him, or to learn from him, or to be healed by him. There were some who came to Jesus to justify themselves, to show that they didn't need Jesus. After feeding the 4,000, he immediately got into the boat with his disciples and came to the region of Dalmanutha. That's on the western side of the Sea of Galilee. Then the Pharisees came out and began to dispute with them, seeking from him a sign from heaven, testing him. But he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, "Why does this generation seek a sign? Assuredly I say to you, no sign shall be given to this generation." And he left them, and getting into the boat again, departed to the other side. Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, and they did not have more than one loaf with them in the boat. Then he charged them, saying, "Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." And they reasoned among themselves, saying, "It is because we have no bread." But Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, "Why do you reason because you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive nor understand? Is your heart still hardened? Having eyes do you not see? Having ears do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments did you take up? They said to him, 12. Also, when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of fragments did you take up? And they said, 7. So he said to them, "How is it you do not understand?" My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share together another few verses from Mark chapter 8, verses 11 to 21. As soon as Jesus got back into the Jewish territory, the Pharisees were on his case. Now, they had come before to seek fault with him. They'd found fault because his disciples were not living according to the things that they emphasized, with the ceremonial, traditional form of washing of hands before they ate. And Jesus had spoken up to defend his disciples, saying, "It's not a matter of the outward appearance, it is the matter of the heart." And that these people, their heart was far from God, while their lips said they were close to God. Now, of course, if you don't wash your hands as an act of rebellion against God, then indeed you are away from God. But that wasn't the purpose of the disciples. The disciples were so busy with what was going on that they had not followed the normal ritual. We see that busyness again. Well, the Pharisees came. This time they said, "If you claim to be the teacher from God, then give us a sign." They could look back in their history and see Moses perform many signs. Elijah performed signs. Of course, signs only occurred occasionally in their history. Their history was not full of signs, except the general sign that God had provided for his people and kept them safe. These are signs that you kind of don't see except by looking at history and seeing how things pan out. That God declared beforehand, sometimes hundreds of years before, things that would happen, and those things actually came to pass. And so that kind of sign you don't see at the time. You need to believe the message when it is given, and in due course you will see the sign that flows from it. But The Pharisees were saying, if you're going to give us a new message different from Moses, then you better have some pretty good signs to make us believe. And Jesus' response was, why does this generation seek a sign? No sign shall be given to this generation. In Matthew's Gospel, possibly on another occasion, he does mention that a sign will be given, the sign of Jonah. That as Jonah spent 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so the Son of Man would spend 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. But of course, again, they could not understand what that meant, because they couldn't conceive, the disciples couldn't conceive, that Jesus would die and come back to life again 3 days later. And when it happened, they denied it anyway. They paid the soldiers to say somebody stole his body, but they knew that that was not true. He was risen from the dead. They saw the sign, but they did not believe it. And so that's why no sign would be given. Jesus was not a miracle worker who was going to do fantastic things to build up his popularity. He was who he was. He was a man of character, a man of teaching, who had performed many mighty works, which were widely attested. And if people were in tune with God, they would recognize the Spirit that was in Jesus as being the Spirit of God and receive him. And if they were out of tune with God, then they would recognize that Jesus' spirit was different from their spirit, and so reject him. Again, Jesus just moves away from the conflict with the Pharisees. He gets in a boat to go to another part of Galilee. And in the boat, he goes on to warn the disciples. Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Leaven is that yeast that goes into bread to make it rise. And it's something that works silently and over a period of time. But it is something that had corrupted the Pharisees and had corrupted Herod. We've already seen that Herod has, for his own reputation's sake, executed John the Baptist, and in due course he would support the execution of Jesus. When he had the opportunity of declaring him innocent, he did not take it, but rather sent him back to Pilate. Jesus, having had a further run-in with the Pharisees, he's saying, don't think like the Pharisees think. Don't think like Herod thinks. But the disciples were thinking of their tummy. They had forgotten to take bread. That's what was on their mind. There was just one loaf, not enough for all of them in the boat. And they thought Jesus was going cross at them because they did not bring enough bread with them. Well, this really exasperates Jesus, because the issue is not bread. God had provided food for 5,000 from 5 loaves. He'd provided bread for 4,000 from 7 loaves. Surely 1 loaf was sufficient for the 13 of them. And having fed that many, there was still some left over. They could trust God to provide food for them, even if it was their fault that they had forgotten to bring enough food with them. We should not be so taken up with the material things of life that we miss the real spiritual issues. When Jesus spoke to them about the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod, he was not talking about physical bread. God would meet that need. He was warning them not to be corrupted in their thinking by knowledge or by power or by status. It's an application of the parable of the soils. We can be so taken up with the cares of this world that the Word of God bears no fruit in our lives. But the Word of God came that it might bear fruit to the glory of God.